Hello and welcome to Hayden Winter Outdoors. Today we're going to be talking about arrow weights. Probably one of the most controversial topics there is in bow hunting. But today let's dive into it and see if we can try and bust some of the myths there is out there about arrow weights and what is the best setup. Now, particularly for a beginner, I think arrow weights is one of the more confusing topics out there, as there are a lot of people online who do sort of preach at the extremes of each end of this topic, and the real thing is there's a happy medium in between. And the way that I find that is, even though I have 3 arrows in front of me from my bow hunting setups, say a 460 grain arrow, a 560 grain arrow, and a 600 plus grain arrow, all these arrows, even though they weigh differently at 28 inches, allows those bows to produce an arrow speed of around that 275 feet per second. Now, at that feet per second, I've found most modern bows will produce some of the most forgiving shots they can. It also allows best forgiveness in the shot. So because there's less vibration and less sound in the shot, it also allows me as an archer to have the most forgiveness in my shot. So if I make a little mistake, it's not really gonna that you might get out of, say, a faster arrow. It also allows me, if I've misjudged a distance, or if I have had an animal move, it allows me to not always, I can remake the shot by just lifting my pin slightly or dropping my pin slightly rather than having to move my sight. Now, the big thing that I find is people talk about heavy and light arrows. My biggest thing is when someone says, should I shoot a heavy arrow or a light arrow, or a heavy arrow or a lighter arrow? My first question is, what do you mean by heavy and what do you mean by light? Because say 30 plus inches, 600 grains isn't probably a particularly heavy arrow. Most decent hunting components with, people who are shooting 80 pounds, they're going to have to be in the 600 odd grain range to produce an arrow that they're able to hunt with. Vice versa, if someone has a smaller draw length and are shooting lower poundage, they might only be stuck, or they might only, with standard components, be able to produce somewhere in that sort of 450, 600 grain, 450, 460 grain arrow. The main thing I'm concentrating on is making sure that my feet per second is around that 275. Now, as I was mentioning before, when we go on to the topic of light arrows, everyone that I've ever seen who seems to be an advocate of light arrows has a above average draw length. The thing is, when you have an above average draw length, you are producing enough kinetic energy with a light arrow that someone with a particularly short draw length will produce with a heavy arrow. So the main thing to remember is that draw length is king, and arrow weight isn't actually something that is on the top of the tier list when selecting arrow. What you want is an arrow that allows enough penetration that the broadhead, if you are trying to broadhead selection with a heavy arrow, you may as well buy a decent company and pull it back to it. Now, the same can be said about the light arrows. If you were trying to overcompensate by jumping the string, you basically are never going to be able to do that. With modern archery equipment and modern arrows, we are talking, most people consider a 350 foot per second shot to be a fast shot. Now, my arrows are traveling at 275 feet per second. Now, what does that actually mean in the real world? Well, in kilometers an hour, you're going to be looking at about 28 kilometers an hour difference. And in miles an hour, I'm presuming it's going to be somewhere around that 15, 16 miles an hour difference. Now, most animals are reacting way faster than basically our equipment can ever react to. So the real issue, if you are trying to overcompensate an animal being aware that you're there, you shooting an animal too far away, or your bow being too loud with a lighter grain arrow, you're never going to achieve that. You have to get closer. You've got to make your bows quieter. And by picking a medium grade arrow, that is definitely going to allow the best of both worlds, where you get more than adequate penetration for all good quality broadheads, as well as enough speed that you're going to have a forgiving shot. Now, I'm not saying you want a forgiving shot because you're going to be shooting at animals at 50 plus meters or 50 plus yards. But if you happen to have a fast moving animal and it goes from 20 to 30, it's then your choice if you want to make the shot, because you have a forgiving setup that can do that. Now, also, if you shoot an animal that is, say you shoot an animal, it decides to run to 50 and is still on its setup, that will then allow your sight to go out to 50 and to have a follow-up shot. Whereas a lot of shorter draw length, high, heavy grain, and if they do have that option, the arrow is going so slow that if that animal to be at 50 instead of, say you ranged it at 53, you're probably going to shoot over its back. And same thing if it was happened to be at 53 and you ranged tougher grass in it, because this arrow is going so slow, and you're more than likely just going to miss the animal completely. The biggest thing you have to hear is in archery, everything is a compromise. Everything is a compromise, and you cannot use the extremes as a band-aid to not getting close enough to an animal, your bow being too loud that the animal is now reacting to the sound, or the animal is alert that you are there because you haven't got the hunting skills to have the animal not know that you're there. On the other end of the scale, you can't overcome bad broadhead selection by upping the grains of the arrow. By having an arrow that makes your produce a 275 feet per second shot, you are getting the best of both worlds that allows the most shots to be the most lethal on most game animals. Now, if that means that your arrow weight is 620 grains because you have a particularly long draw length and fast bow, then that is the grains of arrows. That is what your arrow should weigh. If you're in the, like me, in the medium range of the draw length, and you have most your standard sort of hunting setups now, like your 33-inch sort of Alpha X that I shoot this out of, then you're going to be probably in that mid 500 grains. Now, if you have a shorter draw length, or you're more likely going to be in that mid 400. Now, that is what needs to happen to get the ability to be able to react to any situation. So to summarize it all up, pick an arrow weight which allows your bow to achieve a arrow speed of 200, around that 275 feet per second. Now, if it's 270, if it's 280, you're probably in the right ball range. Now, you can download a feet per second calculator. Bow Bible is the one that I use. It allows you to put in your draw length, your grains of your arrow, and the IBO speed of your bow, and it will spit out a fairly accurate speed rating. It won't be 100% accurate because it does depend on what's on your string and some other setups, but it's going to be close enough that you're going to be in the ballpark. Now, if you are having issues with animals jumping your string, and if you're having issues with animals jumping your string, or they are moving around too much, there is probably something else that you need to address. As if you have animals that you are shooting and you are not getting enough penetration on it, and you are shooting at that 275 feet per second, there's probably other things you need to address first before you look at the arrow weight. Those things can be varying from broadhead selection to shot placement to how alert the animal is. But I would put arrow weight, I would not hold arrow weight as high as a lot of people seem to hold it. And it is not the be all and end all. The easiest thing you can ever do is get your bow to produce that Goldilocks zone of 275 feet per second, and then allow the other components and the other parts of the hunting shot to dictate how the shot goes. I've been Hayden Winter, and if you got any questions on arrow weight or anything else in bow hunting, I'll do my best to help, and cheers for thank you. If you like this particular content, please like, subscribe, and just remember, at the end of the day, it really is your choice. You do whatever the you want to do when it comes to hunting. And as long as you're making clean, ethical kills, it really is down to how you want to hunt. All right, thank you.